Hey, if you were one of those kids who in the early 80s was listening to hard rock, heavy metal, I think you will enjoy this video. What it is I found an article. This is on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1981, in the Waterloo Region Record. And what it is it's just kind of a little overview of a few of the bands and what was happening that year in the world of hard rock and heavy metal. And it's just got these cool little things that I think you'll enjoy listening to. It's a very short article, so this won't be long, but I think you'll have some fun with this. And it even references Neil Young, which is so interesting because he showed up here with this hard rock, in the early 80s, and then he did it again in the early 90s when kind of grunge came in. So it's kind of just fascinating looking at these patterns. All right, so this article is called The Boys in Heavy Metal. And it says, in a field where consistency is the byword, there's at least one surprise. Neil Young. This is by Bob Rittinger. Here's a look at heavy metal rock, starting with the big guns. The album, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, is the third best-selling ACDC album of 1981, which is just amazing, including a reissue of the band's first album. A feat no other group can lay claim to. Why this Australian band should be able to do so when nobody else can is no mystery. AC/DC's music is rough and raunchy rock, exactly what the band's fans want. It's also consistent. Heavy metal fans expect loud, driving, solid rock from the band, and they know they'll get it every time. And I don't know about you, but I struggle every single time the word heavy metal and AC/DC are in the same sentence. But back then, that was very common. But you, in retrospect, you look at those guys and it was just kind of straight ahead rock and roll. That's all they've really ever been. And yet they got kind of in that umbrella way back when, maybe just because of the attitude, the supposed heaviness of the sound. When you listen to the song, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, which is one of their greatest songs. Anyway, it is hard driving, what most people would consider pretty heavy stuff. Okay. For Those About to Rock continues the tradition of including at least one definitive hard rock theme song. In this case, it's the title track. The cannon pictured on the cover gives a good indication of the title song's strength. Those planning on seeing the band live had best be prepared for more than the usual assault on the ears. Now, I want to make a comment here about this and see if you agree with this. Back in Black, which was right before this, in my humble opinion, I've said this many, many times, is the best hard rock album ever made. Maybe best rock album ever made. It's as good as you get. There was no way they would ever be able to follow that album up. For Those About to Rock, the song totally followed it up. It was so great. And the production on it was great. Everything about it was fantastic. The rest of that album left me a little flat. I mean, that's a bad way to put it. There are a lot of great tunes on that album, but it just doesn't compare to Back in Black. It's just not as good. And then for me, after For Those About to Rock, I started losing interest in them, partly for the reason they talked about there, that it felt like it was just kind of the same thing over and over, which is unfortunate because so much of the stuff they did, the Bon Scott stuff, the Brian Johnson stuff, those two albums with Brian Johnson, Back in Black, For Those About to Rock, are just the music is so spectacular. Production, Brian Johnson's voice is so great. Anyway, it just doesn't, I lost it a little bit. But they've always been down to earth, solid rock and roll, even on the albums that I don't love. So there's always stuff in there that you're like, yeah, this is still cool. It's still good. It's easy to get, and it has energy, and it's awesome. Okay, so let's see here. Several of the album's other songs are in the band's Bad Boys mold, heavily laden with images of violence and evil. And these songs like Evil Walks, Inject the Venom, that was that's a really cool song. I have to be careful what I say because sometimes people really come after me. It wasn't as good as Back in Black, period. But there was some great stuff on that album, though. Let's see here. Night of the Long Knives. That Brian Johnson's grating vocals are most suitable. There aren't many singers like him. And over time, each album as they progressively came, he kind of lost that edge, I think. Didn't quite have it quite like it did. Okay, so now we move on to another topic. This is so much fun reading this stuff. Perhaps his only equal in the current heavy metal field is Ozzy Osbourne. I don't know. Okay, former vocalist with Black Sabbath, now in the midst of a highly successful solo career. Diary of a Madman is Ozzy's second solo release, and unfortunately, it sounds like a rehash of his first solo LP, Blizzard of Ozz. However, if he really intends to get his solo career off the ground, I suppose he does have to be reasonably consistent. Now, I don't know. I mean, they do have a lot of similarities, and of course they would. But to me, and a lot of people would argue with me, I know because a lot of people do, I actually like Diary of a Madman better. I thought he actually improved, stepped it up. Randy Rhoads' presentation improved. The stuff, the chords, the way he played at the beginning of Flying High Again, I mean, some of those, it was great. So I actually, personally, second album, Diary of a Madman, slightly better. But Blizzard of Ozz, other people think that one was... anyway, this guy thinks Blizzard of Ozz was... Seems like he thinks that was the touchstone. That was the best. Okay, if there's one thing... Let's see, suppose he does have to be really consistent. If there's one thing Ozzy is, it's consistent. Through a decade with Black Sabbath and afterwards, Ozzy has always appeared half crazed, demented, and on the verge of losing contact with reality. Even if his appearance is an act, Diary of a Madman finally brings all of these elements together. And if it is an act, Ozzy's been living it a long time now. As he says in the title track, "Could I mistake myself for someone who lives behind my eyes?" And I don't know. When you listen to Nikki Sixx, for example, talking about him, the book The Dirt, I think that's the book where he goes into it. He talks about some of the stuff dealing with Ozzy, and it was just, man, the guy was out of control. And when you watch him on stage, I saw him a few times in concert. He really is, just this. He's just constantly moving, and he's got the crazy look in his eyes the whole time. And whatever it is, he's good at it. I mean, there's just nobody like him. Diary of a Madman doesn't have a song as frenzied as Crazy Train or as sinister as Mr. Crowley, both from Blizzard of Ozz, but it is generally a fairly wired effort. Guitarist Randy Rhoads is again one of the album's biggest assets, for sure. No question. Named Best New Guitarist in 1981 by Guitar Player magazine, Rhoads could help Ozzy Osbourne's career to dizzying new heights if they stick together. And as you know, what happened not long after this, we lost Randy Rhoads. And then after Randy Rhoads died, then Ozzy went and put together basically a live album where he did nothing but old Black Sabbath covers. And then he had to replace, that was with Brad Gillis from Night Ranger, just kind of called him up, and Brad had to just very, very quickly learn all that old Black Sabbath stuff so he could go play this stuff in concert. And I think that Speak of the Devil was the name of that album. And then now everybody, I remember this back in, it would have been 83, all of us thinking, okay, now what? No Randy Rhoads. What are we going to do? Who's going to be the new guitarist? Because how do you top him? What do you do about that? And then, of course, Jake E. Lee comes in. And Jake E. Lee I have a whole nother video where I talk about him on this channel, was just spectacular. I mean, I look back at some of the stuff on that album. I don't think that album, Bark at the Moon, really still is as good as either of those first two. But even just the song Bark at the Moon, the way Jake E. Lee plays he's so good. The rhythmic nature of his playing, it's awesome. Okay, let's see. Osbourne's last great guitar sideman, Tony Iommi, is still with the band Black Sabbath. It's too bad, though, that Iommi is all the band has going for it on its last album, Mob Rules. Replacing Ozzy Osbourne on vocals is Ronnie James Dio, which is a lot like replacing concert lighting with flashlights. If they were going for contrast, then why does the band still plod through the same old paces? Listening to this guy say this makes me wonder if he even listened to Mob Rules. Because there are people watching this video. I know because they've watched other videos and we've communicated and they've commented on this that actually prefer the Ronnie James Dio version of Black Sabbath. Matter of fact, for me, I was introduced to Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio as the singer on the soundtrack for the movie Heavy Metal. And I loved Ronnie James Dio. And the truth is, I don't think that Mob Rules sounds a lot like Black Sabbath at all. I mean, the traditional stuff with Ozzy, it really was. It felt in many ways, even though that first one was just new singer. Mob Rules, they changed drummers. It was a new sound. It was really, really new. And for them, it was fresh. And I actually think Mob Rules, the album I love it. I mean, every track on it, I think, is spectacular. Okay. As for the rest of Black Sabbath, drummer Vinny Appice, or Appice, I don't know how his brother Carmine pronounced it Appice, and I can't remember, Vinny Appice, I think is how he says it, is a mechanical and simplistic musician despite the promise of his family name. Brother Carmine Appice is among rock's best drummers. Veteran Sabbath bassist Geezer Butler has gotten to the point where his nickname is a compliment, a good case for mandatory retirement. Is that hysterical? This is what, 1983? Or no, sorry, 81? Geezer? I mean, what was the guy in his early 30s at that point? Geezer. Okay. Mandatory retirement. I totally disagree. Those couple of albums there, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, I absolutely love those albums. I think they're just amazing. So, okay, with all this predictable heavy metal coming out, it figures that it would take someone as unpredictable as Neil Young to mess the works up. Over the years, Young's music has ranged from the lush harmonies of his work with Crosby, Stills, and Nash to the intense visions of Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere and Tonight's the Night, from the distorted hard rock sounds of Rust Never Sleeps and its follow-up Live Rust to the almost down-home feel of the next album, Hawks and Doves. And again, like I said, that's so interesting is that he was then seen as a grunge star. Because they did, you can rock. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't think of what it is. Keep on Rockin' in the Free World. Because he did that with Pearl Jam. And Neil Young, who's well into his career at that point, kind of becomes this hero of the grunge movement almost a decade later, almost exactly a decade after this. Okay, let's see here. There can be little argument that Reactor, Young's latest album, is a heavy metal album. Young has been critically acclaimed for, among other things, his ability to make powerful rock songs from the simplest elements. On T-Bone, by the way, he does have a really incredible raw energy to him. There's no question about it. The song Cinnamon Girl, just had that plodding, heavy, it's not heavy metal, but he had those elements. He definitely had those elements in his music. On T-Bone, Young brings that ability to its logical conclusion, wrapping a raunchy and enjoyable 9-minute performance of an often distorted electric guitar around numerous repetitions of the lines, "Got mashed potatoes, ain't got no T-bone." Much of the rest of the LP concerns the usual hard rock themes of booze and drugs, women and rock. The music is always hard and heavy, loaded with loud guitars, distortion, and feedback. Longtime Young fans may find this one of his most difficult albums to accept, while heavy metal fans will find it one of its easiest. And then these last two paragraphs, you'll get a little bit of enjoyment out of this because we start going into the lesser known stuff, and it'd be interesting to know if you remember any of this stuff. And a final word on the predictable stuff. Pretty Bad Boys from Gatto is, of course, more of the same from this band. It is nice to see the band get a radio hit, but about the only way it's going to make any money. About the only way it's going to make any money, even if it's with a novelty song like Pretty Bad Boy. To be honest with you, I have no idea what he's even talking about here. And then this last one, meanwhile, Helix shows with its second release, at least I've heard of them. I actually have a few of their albums, White Lace and Black Leather, that even a band from Kitchener, Waterloo area is capable of this same sort of drivel. Probably the best song here is Women, Whiskey, and Sin. Give me a break. Okay. Anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that article talking a little bit about that time. Did you live during that time? I shouldn't say that way. Were you paying attention during that time? Were you listening to this kind of stuff during that time? Were you into the hard rock, heavy metal stuff that was happening back in the early 80s, 1981? Because this is the time when so many other groups were just coming online, like Motley Crue. I think Too Fast for Love was coming out right around this time. And man, do I remember hearing that the first time. Anyway, there was a lot changing. And this idea of heavy metal was coming in at that point. And we were about to enter into that phase of 80s metal. And that's why, like I said, I have a hard time throwing bands like ACDC into that world, because they were different. Which is the band we started out this article with. They weren't part of that. They were something different. Anyway, love to get your feedback on this. Please follow the channel, like the video, and leave comments. And let me know what you think about this stuff, what your thoughts were on these bands and others that you were into at the time. And you probably know somebody that is into this same stuff that would enjoy hearing this interesting little article too. So, hey, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.